Hello, everyone. Welcome. And thank you all for joining us on today's webinar from the Infonetics research team. Our topic is something that keeps many of us up at night, and that's the increasing threat of compromised web servers. And today we're going to be discussing how hosting providers can mitigate new and emerging threats. I'm Joanne Emery, the event director here at Infonetics Research, and I want to welcome everyone on the webinar today. And co-presenting with us on this session is our partner, Cloudmark. We've got a great presentation for you today, and just a couple of things before we get started. I'm going to go through a few housekeeping items and some features that can help make your webinar experience more enjoyable. I know a lot of you have been on other webinars with us and with other players in the market, but we do have some new audience members today. I'm just going to briefly go through some of the features that are available for you on today's session. So first of all, that webinar console that you see on your screen can be customized for your personal preference. You can move or resize the windows that you have open on the screen to fit your own needs. And you're going to see a number of buttons across the bottom of the console, and these have a lot more features and options for you, so I encourage you to explore these during the session. One specific button I want to call out is that resource list. It looks like a file folder, and this is where you can access a downloadable version of the entire slide deck today, and we have some other great information to reinforce today's topic today. Another button, you can share the content of today's session today with that Share This button, and we have easy access to Twitter, so you can post and view tweets right from the console. Finally, I just want to call out the Q&A button. We will have a live Q&A session directly following the presentation. I encourage you to submit your questions anytime during the presentation. We want to get to as many as possible, and the earlier you get your questions in, the better chance we have of getting to that today on the session. So with those details out of the way, just a quick introduction of today's panel, and we can get started. Leading the webinar today, we have Jeff Wilson. Jeff is the principal analyst here at Infonetics, and he leads on our security space coverage. So Jeff, welcome today.
Thanks, Joanne. Glad to be here.
Great, and we're also very pleased to have Andrew Conway on our panel today. Andrew is head researcher at Cloudmark, and where he investigates and combats email, mobile, and social network spam. And Andrew has solid experience and background with this topic, and as I said, we're pleased to have him on today. So Andrew, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Great, and now we have a full session for you, so I'm going to turn everything over to Jeff. Jeff?
Great. Thanks, Joanne. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, I guess, depending on where you are in the world. I think we have a pretty interesting topic here and a ton of information to get out today, so I'll get right to it. We're going to talk a little bit today about why hackers are focusing on web servers, some of the attack vectors they use, really hone in on what they do with a server once it's been compromised, and then talk a little bit about solutions that providers can look at to protect themselves from these large-scale web attacks, and then wrap up with the Q&A. So do make sure you're submitting your questions as we go through the session here. We'll try to remind you during the session to make sure to submit those questions into the Q&A panel. You know, what it really comes down to when we see this increasing threat of large-scale web server hacks is that, you know, we've got 2/3 of a billion web servers out there sitting on the internet right now. They're a massive target because there are tons of them and because they offer hackers opportunities that individual computers don't necessarily offer. And that's why we're here today to talk about it. So, you know, let's talk about some sort of high-profile events over the last year. Here are 4 events that I'll present quickly, although we'll talk about in much more detail attacks like these. The first was Fort Disco, which was a compromise of about 6,000 sites, typically sites that were hosting blogs, content management systems, Joomla, WordPress, Data Life, that kind of a thing. It was a brute force attack, so it started with a 25K PC botnet that was hacking these sites, finding passwords, essentially. And then once they got a hold of these sites, launching DDoS attacks from the websites. So there's just a simple brute force password hack, leveraging the power of web servers and internet bandwidth at an ISP to launch DDoS attacks. Also the spam house DDoS, another DDoS attack that started from compromised websites until very recently was the largest DDoS attack on record, just got passed up in February of this year by a single 400 gig attack, but still an absolutely massive attack that at its root started from compromised web servers. Slightly different vector after attack was this EA Apple ID theft. So basically, hackers compromised vulnerabilities probably in a calendar app in a EA Games subdomain, used that vulnerability to put a phishing site in, and from that phishing site started gathering Apple IDs and EA Origins IDs, which is the EA gaming account. So here now, not launching DDoS attacks, but actually using the compromised server to start gathering credentials. And finally, there was a massive campaign called Dark Leech, which is still ongoing. Some of these are ongoing. In fact, Fort Disco is ongoing, and they've just found evidence that they've moved on from Joomla and WordPress and Data Life to now compromising POP3 mail servers as well. But anyways, Dark Leech started by finding a backdoor in Apache servers running 2.2.2 and the SSHD backdoor, escalating to root access in the server, and then installing Apache modules to do whatever they wanted to do once they had root access. Initially, it was ransomware campaigns, but once you have that level of access into a server and the ability to upload modules, you can do just about anything that the hacker wanted to do. So those are all wide-scale attacks leveraging the scale and power of websites. Shifting gears a little bit to another way to compromise and use a hacked web server, and that is to launch targeted attacks. So recently we've seen the emergence of the watering hole attack, maybe as much like a spear phishing campaign, a way to target an individual or a small group of individuals by compromising, doing some social research, understanding what sites your targets visit, and then finding soft sites within the list of sites that they visit, compromising those sites and using that as a way to gather whatever information it is you're trying to gather about those targets. Typically their credentials, but maybe other personal information. The one I'm presenting here was discovered in February before the President's Day holiday. It was an attack of the VFW site targeting U.S. military personnel. It's probably associated with a couple of earlier attacks, and they're trying to get information likely on critical infrastructure asset holders. So these are people owning bits of information about our critical infrastructure. There's not very much information available yet, but this is going after a small group of people by attacking a site where they found a soft underbelly, and it was visited by their targets. But that wasn't the only one. There are a few interesting examples. The U.S. Department of Labor site, Site Exposures Matrices website was hacked, and probably going after specific government and energy sector targets. An iPhone developers SDK forum was compromised. Hackers were gathering information on iPhone app developers for who knows what reason. So the watering hole takes it more into sort of the personal targeted dimension. But it's not all these sort of Mission Impossible plots. Going back to the first side and the first four examples, most hacks at websites are looking to leverage scale. They're looking to target web applications, operating systems that have a one-to-many capability. Typically, it's going after things like the web administration platforms like Plesk and cPanel, microblogging sites, WordPress, widely used development tools, content management tools like Joomla. PHP is a common denominator in a lot of cases. Forum applications like vBulletin and PHPB that use PHP as well. So they're looking for a way into as many sites as possible from one exploit and leveraging automated tools in order to help with this. So why do they target web servers? And I think I've given some clues already, but it really comes down to four things. They have access. like I said, 2/3 of a billion web servers on the internet, many of them running out-of-date software, whether that's operating systems, out-of-date software sitting on top of the operating systems like out-of-date WordPress or out-of-date vBulletin. Many are not actively maintained or monitored, so their accounts are started, a website set up, and then they sit there with no real security investigation of that site and no active monitoring or maintenance of the site. Web servers have power that personal computers don't have. So if you could have 25,000 individual computers or 6,000 web servers, there's a lot to be gained out of having a network of 6,000 web servers to use to launch an attack. You have incredible compute performance. You're talking server level hardware. You have high bandwidth, closer to the internet than a desktop, and it's stable. Web servers don't tend to move around. They have 24/7 internet connections, so you have the power of their connections to use. You have access to tons of data, massive stores of account credentials, massive stores of credit card data, and other financial assets. So once you compromise a web server, the cache of data that you have access to is much more powerful. And from them, you can, like I said, either go after targeting individuals or small groups of people, or leveraging very broad attacks. And you also gain access to, hopefully, sites that have good reputation. In a lot of cases, if you're running spam campaigns, what you want to make sure you're doing is using domains that have good reputation so that you can take advantage of that to be more successful. So this to-do list is really the meat of the presentation, and Andrew and I are going to have a discussion in a little bit where we go into all of these in detail. But just to introduce it, once a hacker gains access to a server, what are they going to do? What do they have to do? It really breaks down to 3 categories. They have some administrative tasks. We all love doing admin, and I'm sure hackers love it too. They have to take control of the site. Once they have control, they have to keep control. They have to fight off any attempts to get rid of them. And then in order to make the best use of the site, they have to figure out a way to escalate their privileges from however they got in to having control over an entire site or maybe even an entire physical server. Then they want to start attacking whatever their direct threats are, distributing malware, launching DDoS attacks, stealing data, defacing sites, really going straight to the meat of the attack. Or they might be taking more of a spam and advertising angle. Things like backlinks for domain reputation, click fraud, ad insertion, sending spam and hosting spam landing pages. So like I said, we're going to go through all of those in detail with examples, but that's sort of an introduction to the broad categories of things that hackers are looking to do once they gain access to a server. And like I said, this is a problem on the rise. This is some data from Cloudmark's Global Threat Network of new compromised domains by date. This tends to come and go in waves. There's variability. The variability is around maybe a new vulnerability being discovered and to go after, or modifying techniques after attack detection for a second or third wave of attacks. So there tend to be these sort of campaigns of going after web servers. It's up and down, but in general, it's very much on the rise. In terms of cost, when a web server gets hacked, half the time it goes down. When hackers are on a server, they use more resources. Absolutely. They blame you for the attacks, you being the hosting provider. So for a hosting provider, for an individual site owner, this is a problem. For a hosting provider, it's a problem multiplied by the number of sites or servers they host that have that vulnerability. And this can translate into bad reputation spreading, domain reputation, IP reputation, etc. You could be the source of a large DDoS attack if you have a bunch of servers on your network compromised. And in terms of response time, there's absolutely work that can be done here. We're not going to name the culprits on this, hosting provider A through J. But as you can see, the average life of a hacked domain, no one was less than 15 days, and even for a few providers on this list, it was more than 30 days. And sites are typically shut down in a lot of cases so that they can't affect anyone else, and that's bad for the site owner, and particularly bad if it happens in large scale for the hosting provider. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Andrew, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of the more common attack vectors. So Andrew?
Sure, thanks, Jeff. So we see it doesn't need to be a zero-day exploit to get into a web server. It doesn't even need to be a zero-year exploit. If you remember that graph of new hacked domains detected by Cloudmark per day, there was a big spike around this time last year that went on for a couple of months, and most of that was attacks on a couple of Joomla 1.5 vulnerabilities. Joomla 1.5 is a way out-of-date release. Patches have been available for those particular vulnerabilities for years. There's a SQL injection attack and a content manager, the JCE content manager plugin. You can upload a PHP file with a JPEG extension and then rename it to PHP afterwards. Again, these are not particularly difficult attacks once you're aware of them. We also see WordPress being commonly attacked, both by brute force password attacks. Strong passwords aren't just for root. You need a strong password on anything that will let a spammer put PHP. We see brute force password attacks being used generally, and there are lots of other vulnerabilities. We can talk about a few of those later. Here's a case where over a year ago now, one particular cybercriminal was distributing a script, some PHP code to be added to plugins to turn them into Trojans. And he claims, now remember these people lie, but he claimed that he was able to gain access to 100,000 IP addresses in 3 months. Unfortunately, by the time I got this email, he'd already sold out, so I couldn't actually get a copy of the code and see what he was doing, but probably wasn't very sophisticated. Here's something that was published fairly soon before that big spike in Joomla 1.5 attacks. And while this one may not have been responsible, something like it was, this is a Turkish, well, let's be polite and call him a security researcher, who published a PHP script for getting across one of those Joomla exploits. But instead of just pointing it at a website and having it take control of that website, it took a whole list of websites, a whole list of domains, and went through checking each one to see if it was vulnerable, and if so, putting in a file so that you could take control of it. This is how you get hold of that list, Google Dorks. A Google Dork is a website that is vulnerable and can be detected. That vulnerability can be detected just by a Google search. Some of these are using bits of Google search that aren't commonly used. But there's a whole, as you can see, there's a whole database of these out there that's used by both security researchers and hackers. And just by entering this Google search, often using the Google API, so it can be incorporated in a program, you immediately get back a list of potentially vulnerable websites that you can then go and try and compromise. And over the past year, these are headlines from the WebRoot blog, you can see an increasing reports of tools available on the cybercriminal underground that exploit websites in bulk, that take a Google Dork, a search like this for a vulnerability, then try and apply that vulnerability automatically and come back to you in a few hours or a few days with, hey, these are a list of websites you've just compromised. Have fun. So I'm going to turn this back to Jeff now to introduce the next section.
So like I said, the meat of the presentation is really, once the hackers have access to a server, what is it that they're doing with the servers? And it broke down into three main categories. The first category was administrative tasks. And Andrew and I are going to have a little bit of a dialogue here. We're going to go through all of these uses one by one, starting with the administrative tasks. So like I said, you got to get control, you got to keep control, and you have to escalate control. So what are they doing to get control of servers, Andrew?
Well, typically they'll upload a PHP shell. This is one example. For some reason, cyber criminals like black backgrounds. It's part of the whole scene. But sometimes we'll see 3 or 4 of these installed on a single compromised domain where different groups have been using that domain for their own purposes. And some of them are actually better than the sort of standard cPanel file manager that your hosting company provides for you. So once they're there as well, they will want to keep control. And very often, aside from the main software like that and other specialized software, there'll be some sort of backdoor that will enable them to keep control of that web server once they're there, regain control. This is very sneaky because it consists of fairly small modifications to an existing file. The main code is actually hidden within an image file, within the comment information in a JPEG. And that can be your JPEG that was already on your site. And then 2 lines of code inserted in one of the PHP scripts that are on your site that will actually read that and execute that hidden PHP code that's hidden in the JPEG image. And what that does is it looks for a parameter being passed in from the outside and then executes that code. So that's very sneaky. I mean, you might think that you've deleted all the files that the hacker left there, but if these are still around, they can get back in.
Yeah, that seems like it would be really difficult to detect.
Yeah, there's actually, that one is known by at least some of the virus scanners. That one has known signatures that they will pick up now. But in fact, I first became aware of that one when I was just browsing a website, and a virus alarm went off, and my virus scanner on my Mac had picked up the bad data in the image. Here's escalating privileges. This is when you can see that it happened, that a hacker managed to go from controlling one domain on a shared web server to controlling that entire web server. Suddenly, for this particular host, which is a non-US hosting company, suddenly we see a big spike in the number of compromised domains in a single day. And when I looked a little more closely, they were all on the same IP address. So someone had managed to find a hole and escalate privileges on that server.
Yeah,
Jeff, you want to talk about the next section?
Yeah. That seems like the real problem is when they do find ways to end up with root access to a box, and you might depending on exactly how many customers you have running the same package that they were able to compromise in the first place, one compromised domain can quickly turn into lots and lots of servers on your network doing things that they're not supposed to do. So here we are back to more black backgrounds. So now they have control, they've escalated their privileges, they start launching attacks. So what are some of the common attacks that we see directly launched from hacked servers?
Well, first let's start with a success story. Sometimes they will simply use the web server to host an exploit kit that will try and take over the browsers, take over the PCs of anyone who visits that website. But just last fall, the criminal, Dmitry Fedotov, I believe, went by the name of Torch, who was responsible for the most widely used exploit kit, was arrested in Russia. And it's really nice to know that if you really are enough of a threat, even in Russia, law enforcement will eventually catch up with you. The black hole exploit kit has become less fashionable. We're now seeing the people who were using it to build botnets, in other words, Paunch's customers, are now distributing more of their malware via email spam campaigns and trying to trick people into installing Trojans. Another thing, we already talked about the Spamhaus DDoS attack. This tool on the right is another. It's a less sophisticated DDoS attack launcher that we've seen on compromised domains. The Spamhaus attack was launched by a 15-year-old kid, 15 or 16. I think he was probably 15 when he did it and 16 when he was arrested. Yeah, if you're annoying enough, you will get arrested. But he had just a handful of compromised domains, but was using DNS amplification on open DNS resolvers. For this to work, you need to be able to spoof your IP address. In other words, you send in a DNS request pretending to be your victim, and then the response, which can be much bigger than your initial query, gets sent to that victim. So that's how that attack worked. Most of the internet does not allow IP address spoofing anymore. If you're on a network that does, get your sysadmin, get it fixed. It's an easy fix. There's your gateway router configuration needs to be set not to allow IP address spoofing. So if you take one thing away from this presentation, then it should be that.
Yeah, and DDoS seems to be where they really leverage the power of the individual servers in a hosting environment, as well as the bandwidth available to them. In fact, I think I just saw that there was a recent DDoS attack that used like close to 200,000 WordPress sites to launch. It wasn't the largest attack, but here we see WordPress again being the source of some problems.
So a couple of examples of data theft. One is a tool that we've seen, part of one of those general purpose PHP shells for probing at SQL databases. And again, it can run through various passwords. Maybe you didn't put a password on your SQL database because, hey, it can only be accessed from your web server. It's perfectly safe. Or maybe you use a password like password or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So go after your SQL data if it's there. Another one, the Smuckers attack recently, where the spammers actually captured financial data, credit card information from incoming form data. So even if you have a secure connection, even if you have that little padlock by the URL, if the web server at the other end has been compromised, then the criminals own that data, even if it's being transmitted securely over the internet. Finally, just sometimes people will hack a website for the fun of it or to make a political point or something. And the one thing that I found at least somewhat redeeming about this picture is that's not a real US flag. It has the wrong number of stars and the stripes are wrong. So they couldn't even get that right. But,
something doesn't look right there. All right.
Yeah. Someone hand-painted a sheet.
So the attacks are certainly interesting, but in a lot of cases, compromising websites and accessing their power, whereas DDoS doesn't necessarily care about reputation. When you get into the world of spam and malvertising, taking advantage of the good reputation of a compromised site is really a powerful tool. But not the only reason, obviously, the scale and scope, the ability to launch large-scale campaigns is important as well. So let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that they use hacked web servers to launch spam and malvertising campaigns.
Sure. One thing is not using the reputation of the domain directly, but using it to improve the reputation of your domain by inserting backlinks. And then when the search engine spiders go through, they'll see a lot of links to your domain, and that can be good for search engine optimization, get you a higher rating. And I suspect, though they're not talking about it, that this also will influence Gmail's spam filtering. If they see a high reputation domain, they're less likely to filter that when they see it in spam. And here's an example. We got 3 invisible links to these jurist 4character.ru websites. Those are all over the internet. There are tens of thousands of pages that have these invisible links to websites not containing any data scattered over the internet. I think someone is sitting there, letting them be there for a long time and therefore gradually build up reputation before they get used in some spam campaign. That's our own little Google Dork, actually. If you search on pages linking to juristpjym.ru, you'll find a lot of sites that have already been compromised, so they have some vulnerability there. Here's one that's a bit more obvious. Here's your multi-million-dollar waterfront home in Florida for sale, and someone has hacked the realtor's website and put an advertisement for Viagra on it. That's not the brightest thing to do. Of course, spammers are stupid, but it's because nothing says I've hacked your website better than an ad for Viagra popping up in the middle of it. So typically,
a big pop-up ad. Yeah. Although I like the fact that they are actually at least targeting their merchandise to the customer.
I have no idea what you're talking about there. Click fraud. I mean, there is a value associated with clicks, and you can generate synthetic clicks by putting an invisible iframe. This is actually a website that is reselling click fraud traffic. If you need clicks, you can simply get this. You'll get an exposure that nobody sees, that only lasts for a second or two, but you can buy them really, really cheap. So if you want to commit click fraud, you don't even have to go to the effort of compromising your own domains. This guy is selling fraudulent clicks. Something that the Cloudmark sees a lot of is compromised domains being used for call to action URLs in spam. Now, with a compromised domain, we have to be more cautious than just a disposable domain that the spammer has registered, and typically we'll start by looking at the URL level rather than blocking the whole domain. We don't want to block the genuine traffic that belongs to that domain, though in some cases we have to. If we're not seeing any genuine traffic, then we'll go ahead and put a block at the domain level. There are various ways that the spammer can then redirect, meta refresh, 302 location changed, or just put their website in an iframe. But the sneaky one, and the reason why we end up having to block at the domain level, is when someone takes over using htaccess mod rewrite or some other form, takes over the 404 response for that website. Which means that any random URL on that website that the spammer can generate that isn't a genuine page will then redirect to the spammer's landing page. And there's an example down there. He's actually ruling out certain common referring pages, and he doesn't redirect to his website if you've come in a genuine web search or something like that. Only if you've clicked on the link in one of his emails, his spam emails, will you then get redirected.
Gotcha.
So in some cases we'll see tens or dozens of different URLs being used in spam, all from the same compromised website, and some of them don't actually represent genuine files. Compromised web server can also be used to send spam. This is one example. And the comment in the code is infect those so-and-sos in Portuguese, except that it's a rather nastier word than so-and-so in Portuguese, I think. Hope there's no Portuguese speakers on the webinar. But if so, it was the spammer's words, not mine. And there's some samples of the subject lines for the spam that was actually being sent out by this particular script. They're fake bank transaction messages sent to Brazilian customers, and but in fact the payload is malware. So he is actually trying to infect these people with malware with this particular spam attack. One of many. The spammer will sometimes, rather than referring to their own landing page, actually host the landing page directly on the compromised domain. And here's a case where a pornographic landing page was hosted in a hidden directory on a church website. And the church actually went ahead and took down their website in the end. But they didn't find the directory that the spammer had in his landing page. So their domain was still hosting the spammer's landing page long after their own website had been taken down.
Oh no, I can imagine the conversation with the congregation after somebody discovered that particular landing page. It was
I must admit, actually, that one I actually called them up and left a message to warn them about that one. There's a couple of normally we don't have the resources to do that, but for somewhere where it's a church, and another case where a website belonging to a law enforcement officer that he was using to share evidence files with other police departments. When that was hacked to host actually the same spammer's landing page, I actually talked to the guy on the phone and led him through where he was hosting pornography. And he thought that he was up to date on computer forensics, and he knew how to find incriminating evidence on other people's computers. He just hadn't noticed it on his own web server.
Oh wow! Yeah, it's nice that you can use the personal touch on occasion.
Yeah, unfortunately, we only can only do that in special cases where it's a sensitive site that we detect. In most cases, it's up to the owner or the hosting company to first detect and then fix the problem, which brings us into the next section, actually dealing with the problem. So there's a few easy things that will make things better. If you have PHP on your website, or if you're a hosting company managing this for a number of people, make sure that you're running PHP 5.3 or above, and make sure that these two configuration parameters are set like that, so that any message that gets sent out using PHP send will actually log the script that it comes from. That's very handy for spam filtering companies like Cloudmark. We can hook in on that header, and if we see that script is sending spam, everything that it sends, even if the actual content of the email mutates and changes, so long as we see it coming from the same script, it'll just get filtered. And it also gives auditing capability to let you know that you've been compromised. I already mentioned.
PHP does seem like the common denominator in a lot of cases, and it's funny. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning that a lot of this is due to the fact that there are poorly maintained or unmaintained sites out there. And, fortunately for hackers, a lot of them run PHP, and there are millions and millions of them running old versions and, not being watched.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, although actually I mentioned that, old versions of Joomla are a problem, but actually keeping your WordPress up to date doesn't seem to help. We see as many compromised domains with recent releases of WordPress than we do with old releases. Either that's because they were compromised in the past with an old release and it's been updated, but the compromise is still there. That is coming in through WordPress plugins, and even if you're running the latest release of WordPress, WordPress, if you have an old plugin that's vulnerable, then your website may still be vulnerable. I already mentioned, don't allow IP address spoofing in your network and open DNS servers. So let's make sure that something like the spam house attack, if it happens again, doesn't happen coming from your network. As far as stopping outbound spam, it's a good idea to see what's going out of your network. Spammers can send through your own web servers on your network or directly. So to look at those direct sends, just get a transparent proxy on ports 25 and 587 and put spam filtering on that. And guess what? Cloudmark has a product to do that. Obligatory sales pitch. Finally, if you're a hosting company, please send your email address and your ASN to research@cloudmark.com, and I will send you Cloudmark's list of currently compromised domains that you're hosting, and please try and clean those up. So I should mention that of the list that we saw earlier of the compromised domains and the time to fix them, actually some of those are people I have sent this list to. And there is not a strong correlation between cleanup times and having the information available. It is a difficult task for hosting companies, even if they know that these domains have been compromised. If they have hundreds or even thousands, it's hard to clean them up. Moving on to some longer-term things, we need a culture of strong passwords, and not just for high-powered accounts like root. As I said, we're seeing people going through brute force attacks on WordPress, on databases, and so on. So any account with access to anything sensitive, even if it's just editing WordPress, needs a strong password on it. For hosting companies, I feel fairly strongly that malware detection should be built into the account, just as spam filtering is built into your email account at ISPs. Now, some people, some hosting companies will sell that, try and sell that as an extra, and that's similar to the situation with spam in Japan, where spam filtering is an extra on your email account with many ISPs. That just means that there's a huge and thriving spam culture in Japan, because there's a lot of soft targets for the spammers out there. Again, same thing. If malware detection on hosting accounts is an add-on, then there's a lot of soft targets out there. There's a lot of people who won't bother to pay, and that just is giving money to the cyber criminals and helping keep them in business and keep these attacks going. As far as remediation goes for hosting companies, try and make it as automated as possible. As I say, we've seen long delays. I am actually going to name a couple of names, which is the people who are doing this pretty well, because I think they deserve some credit. But the fastest cleanup rates we're seeing right now are Amazon and HostGator, and some of that is I think that they have automated this process so that it doesn't require a lot of manual intervention to deal with these threats. One possible workflow is first password protect the website. Stop it doing any damage. Notify the customer that they have a problem, provide them with resources for fixing it, and then unpassword protect it when the thing is fixed. Now, I'm going to throw a question out to you for our question and answer. If you have other solutions or suggestions for this remediation process, or indeed for preventing compromised domains in the first place, please go ahead and submit. Actually, you'll have to submit it as a question, but just put comments in the question submission process, because I want to learn from you what you're doing about this problem. So, yes, the obligatory sales pitch, I think I mentioned this earlier, that not all compromised domains are used by spammers or for spamming, but a lot of them are. And if that's happening on your network, then you need Cloudmark. Cloudmark, security platform for broadband, which is your complete inbound and outbound spam handling solution. Okay, there we are. I hope Mark is happy now. So, Jeff, do you want to wind this up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you absolutely win the award for shortest sales pitch in a webinar. I don't know if we have a plaque or a certificate available for you, but that was impressive. A quick reminder, as Andrew said, to submit questions. We're about to move into Q&A. I'm just going to do a little bit of wrap up and pass it to Joanne, and then we'll move into Q&A. So please do submit questions, and any questions that we're not able to get to during the Q&A session, we can handle offline. So, but I think the conclusions here are pretty straightforward. When hackers are looking for targets, they look for scale, right? They look for commonalities, and they look for vectors. With 2/3 of a billion web servers on the internet, a lot of them running either the same versions of operating systems or applications that have easy vulnerabilities, whether those are brute force vulnerabilities because people are bad at passwords, or those are technical vulnerabilities that have been discovered by the attackers. They're a massive target. They look for those easy points of entry and look to be able to touch as many victims as possible. Unfortunately, for a hosting provider, this means that unless a domain on your network has been attacked as part of a watering hole campaign, it's probably not just going to be one domain or one server when there is a campaign. When the next Dark Leech or the next Fort Disco hits, it's probably not just going to be one server on your network. It will be tens or hundreds or thousands of domains that are compromised. The attacks take bandwidth, and then once the servers are compromised, they're using your resources day in and day out for days and days and days, and the remediation process is not simple. So take advantage of some of the easy steps that Andrew pointed out, and like he said, if you have processes, workflows, or technologies that you use that you want to submit to the group here, submit them through the Q&A session. Because it would be good. This is a case where everyone needs to share information in order to, preventing the problems, probably an impossibility, but limiting the scope of the impact is what we can do as a community. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Joanne for a little bit of housekeeping, and then we will launch into the Q&A. Joanne?
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Andrew. A lot of good information here. As I said at the top of the presentation, some scary, but I think it's top of mind on everyone's line. Protecting domains is key, and protecting reputation is key. So I know I'm just going to launch a quick survey here. We have an audience survey for you, so I'm going to push that forward. I know we have a number of questions here coming in. Yeah, this is good. So we're going to turn right back to the question answer period. And again, like Jeff mentioned, get your questions coming in, share your experiences, and that's the best way to foster a community here and get some answers to what's going on behind the scenes by the hackers. So with that, Jeff, are you ready to go with your first question?
Yeah, I think we are ready here. The first question is there any regionality or the regional trends in these attacks? And I know obviously when we've looked at Cloudmark's data and the SMS side, there are absolutely some regional trends, but how about on the compromised domain side of things?
Yeah, I mean, the most compromised domains are in the U.S. That's because that's where most of the hosting companies are, and again, that's partly because the U.S. was where the internet started out and had a lot of early adapters, and also has the most IP addresses. So IP addresses are are cheaper in the U.S. than they are in areas without as large an allocation. We do see quite a lot in Europe as well. The big hosting companies there, like OVH and so on, have a lot of compromised domains. So it's mostly nowhere is doing particularly bad. We can't point at Eastern Europe and say, oh, it's all those former Soviet republics again. In this case, it's everywhere, and it's simply just where the web servers are located.
Gotcha. So is there any variance on the where the attacks come from, or is it pretty much the same sources that we see globally for attacks of all types?
I wish I knew where the attacks were coming from.
Yeah.
There's something for a PC botnet. Those PCs have to get instructions from somewhere, and they're not listening all the time for instructions. Something somewhere has to be pushing out instructions for them, and that's the command and control server, which has which is a weakness as far as the criminals are concerned, because it gives security agents a point that botnet can be attacked and conceivably taken down if you can take down the command and control servers. With a web server-based botnet, web servers are always listening on port 80. You can't block port 80 in your firewall. That's what they're there for. You just have to put something on there that is listening out for instructions on port 80, and you can control that from anywhere. You can. So there is no single point where you can say this botnet is being controlled from here, and this server, this command and control server was rented by so and so. So we don't know where this is coming from. Some of the large attacks. One of the large attacks, I can say, I think this guy is probably in the United States because he took Thanksgiving off. That's circumstantial evidence at best,
Yeah, so that makes it a little bit trickier, because then you have to do some dedicated research on each event to sort of gather intel on the attacker, rather than just monitoring the command and control infrastructure, sort of in an automated way to learn about it.
Even then, when I was able to work with a hosting company to look at how a machine had originally been compromised and attacked, that attack was coming through a PC that had been compromised. So this person, is hiding their attacks behind another layer of compromised machines.
Yep. Yeah, multiple steps. If you think about the Fort Disco example, creating a 25,000 PC botnet in order to brute force attack the websites, to then gain control over the sites, to then do whatever it is that you're going to do next. There's so many layers in the attack that it's hard to parse everything that's going on. All right, so we have another question here. How about anti-malware packages for web servers? Is there anything that you would recommend in particular?
I think I haven't tried and compared them all. I think Sophos is pretty good on the server side. They have quite a good approach. Another question that's related is what do I do if my personal website is compromised? And for that one, there is a company called Sucuri, S-U-C-U-R-I, that specializes in cleaning up compromised websites. It's a very manual process and doesn't scale very well, but it'll cost you somewhere between $50 and $100 per domain. So something that'll do fine for a personal thing, but doesn't scale up to a hosting company really. If you don't want to go that way, if you have a backup taken before the compromise, restore your website from a backup taken before the compromise. Otherwise, I think my recommendation might well be start with a clean directory and rebuild your website from scratch using the latest version of all the software involved, and do not move anything over from the old website, because even images can be hiding malicious code.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the answer in a lot of cases. The best practice for a personal computer, and sadly, possibly for a website as well. It's funny. You said it would be good for the hosting providers to help their customers enforce a culture of strong passwords. I can also see on the anti-malware side, one of the automated ways, one of the quick ways to get anti-malware out to everyone would be to include it as a feature in the sort of the hosting package, Plesk or cPanel. Unfortunately, those are often the root of the problem. So the simple solution may not even be that helpful. I mean, certainly that would be the easiest way, right? Is to just build it into the control panel. But if the control panel is compromised, then it doesn't really make a difference.
But I still think hosting companies need to be doing more about this. Just as in the early days of spam, we're coming up to the 20th anniversary of the green card lawyers spam, actually, in another week or two. So, but for about the first 10 years of spam, ISPs didn't really saw it as their job to provide email, but not to provide secure email, not to filter spam. And it was only when spam filtering was put in at ISP level rather than at the personal level that we saw real progress with dealing with the spam issue. So I think in this case we're going to have to see anti-malware put in at the hosting company level rather than at the individual level before this problem starts to go away.
So one last question, sort of along those same lines. What can, since brute force password attacks are still so common, what can a hosting provider do to help their customers en masse do a better job of using strong passwords across all of their infrastructure, for their database or for any part of their website, for their WordPress site, for any part of the website? Is there anything that the providers can do to help the customers?
Oh, maybe putting out a few horror stories. I'll be happy to provide them.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
Fear, uncertainty, and doubt, great motivators.
Yep. Good. All right. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Joanne for a couple of little wrap-up items. Thank everybody for joining today, though. I think we had a great discussion. Joanne?
All right. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks again to Andrew and to Cloudmark for partnering with us on this webinar. As a reminder, the webinar will be available on demand, so you can come back in and view it, or you can share it with any of your colleagues. Hope you found the information interesting and useful. I think there was a lot of good data, a lot of good data points, a lot of good information here. So we appreciate your time joining us today. We hope you join us for more Infonetics webinars in the future. If you have any questions or comments, please let us know. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.